This is the Brattleboro Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, November 19th, 2014. It's a special meeting, and I thank you all for coming out on the especially cold night. Okay, so the meeting's called to order, and the first order of business is to approve the minutes of October 6th. Which was some time ago, but here are our meeting minutes.
All right, that was when Confusion was here. I move that we approve the minutes of October 6th, 2014.
Okay, anyone second? Care to second them? Second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Motion's carried. Okay, well, we have some announcements.
I'm sorry, could I just
Do we
catch
have another set of meetings that have to be approved?
I asked Sue about that, and she said since there wasn't a quorum,
Oh, it doesn't.
it was an official meeting that required minutes.
Right.
No, I already have it. So the 22nd, we don't have to approve those?
No.
No.
No, there's only two of you here. Anybody else need the 6th?
We're going to let Art flow over us. So, David, would you like to make your announcement?
Yes, I will make my announcement. Unfortunately, due to work commitments and I'm doing the final push for my school degree, I had to cut back somewhere, and so I will be resigning from both this commission and the Development Review Board for the spring, effective February 1st for the Development Review Board. For this commission, if I know that was around the time when we were going to start, I believe it was going out into the community, was that the time?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
If my resigning at that time without a replacement by then would make things more difficult, I would be open to extending it further until a replacement was found for me. But I would.
And you're
for
going
my
to get per diem?
Well, I would.
Or a gallon of ice cream, maybe.
I would be willing to stay on if it came to February 1st and there was no one and it really put you guys in a jam. I could stay on further until a replacement was found, but I would like to leave sooner.
Yeah.
Closest to February 1st as I can. But if it would put people out, I could try my darndest to shuffle things around and help you guys.
Well, David, I appreciate that, and we appreciate your service. And wouldn't you say that it's been fun being on the Planning Commission?
It has been fun. I've learned a lot and met some really great people.
And wouldn't you encourage others to
I would
join?
Definitely. I would definitely, because for me, it really wasn't. It isn't about the work or what we're doing. It's just in my personal life I needed to cut back. But what I did do on the board, I loved, and if other people are interested in civic engagement, I strongly encourage people to apply.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Who's going to give our award acceptance speeches? From
Well, I think we're just going to can that wonderful speech.
Yeah, or just roll it out.
Run it again.
Right.
Yeah.
This is a great board. We get awards all over the place.
Yes, it's an award-winning board. Rod, would you like to discuss our next award?
The ultimate follow-up to David's resignation. This is physical proof that we got the VPA Plan of the Year award for our 2013 town plan.
Town plan.
And
it was voted on by other states.
Yes.
New Hampshire.
Yes, it wasn't even our peers.
Yeah.
It was New Hampshire, the planning chapters of the APA from
Northern New England?
Well, Northern New England excluding Vermont. So it was the Maine and New Hampshire chapter members that voted
That's so
on the plan.
interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
State.
Yeah.
So there you go.
We switch them up so that we look at theirs and they look at ours.
Right.
Yeah.
The ultimate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah. So join us.
Yeah.
All right. be an award-winning
Talking to you.
planning commission. Okay, there you go. And Sue's children have been coveting this for some time, so we just got it back on the office. There you go. They didn't.
We should have an
a
article
whole
in the
award thing
paper.
really gets them going.
Just as for a little PR.
Yeah,
we could do
right?
that.
In the news.
We could do that as a recruitment tool, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah,
or
it
just
would
to make the town aware, you know?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so there's no public here for public comment, so let's go right into the zoning bylaw work session with our consultant, Brandy Saxon. Thank you, Brandy.
Okay, so we're going to pick up where we left off at the last meeting. We've got one chapter left in part 3 that you have, we haven't reviewed yet, and we're going to go through that one, and then we're going to talk about the public outreach pieces. And if we have time, I know we've had folks who haven't been at all of the meetings where we've been looking at part 3. So if we get through those 2 items and we have extra time, we will entertain going back and looking at things that we did look at the last couple of meetings when we haven't had everybody there. So,
Or we could just let art blow over us.
yeah, so we're going to see how we want to get all the way through this and see where we end up. So
what page are we looking for, Brandy?
if you have the November 3 draft, it's on page 343. And if you have the October 29 draft, for some reason it's on page 336. And I don't know exactly why there's a slight variation in these page numbers. But I don't think there's actually a variation in content.
No.
I
And
remember
it's
you had different pages than we
Page
did
numbers,
also, because
yeah.
you were already
Yeah.
updating
Yes.
things and creating your own.
it's
Yeah.
section. It's the 330, which is resource protection standards.
Everybody found it?
Are we all on the same page? Ish?
Okay, roughly. So the first section, and let's do this like we did the last one. I give you a little overview of what's in each section, and then we can talk through any questions or issues. This is a new addition to the zoning. It deals with steep slopes. And in that case, it's basically slopes from greater than 15% and up. And what it does is set some limits on how much of slopes of various grades can be disturbed before a conditional use review by the Development Review Board would be required. So for the slopes up to 30%, it's not actually prohibiting development on these slopes. It's just setting a threshold at which point enough slope is being disturbed that the conditional use review would be required. And that's what the table there on the second page of this figure 321 is getting at when it has the amount of land in a slope category that you could disturb, and then how much of the area of that amount of slope on the lot can be disturbed. So there's also some design guidelines that deal with placement of structures below ridge lines, trying to...
Is this all new?
This is all new language.
And that little chart too?
All of it, yep. There's really nothing equivalent to it in your current zoning.
No.
And how does this relate to other towns dealing with this? Is this a similar kind of...
There is a range of different approaches out there on dealing with slopes. It is starting to become something that more communities are putting in because of all of the stormwater and flooding and related issues. It's really one of the elements that ties into this whole system. In fact, most of this entire resource protection chapter is really all, it's, there's several sections here, but they all basically are on the same theme, which is water quality, flooding,
Irene.
and sedimentation. Irene.
Good night.
So they are all carrying a portion of trying to minimize those impacts and getting at it from different aspects of development.
How do you determine if you're building on a buried slope? Do you choose the most conservative measurement or liberal? Or?
So this is always a little bit of a challenge, is to figure out how to measure the slopes. The good news is that in fairly short order, this whole state is going to be LiDAR, and there's going to be good elevation data. So within a year or two, this is going to become less of an issue. there's going to be decent statewide data available. Right now, there's the natural resource data that is available from the state, does show the slopes. It's from the 15-meter DEMs that were done, so it's not precise. So it would give you indications of the general areas of a piece of land that were at these various slope categories. And so this is set up so that the applicant can do more detailed topographic survey work if they want to try to prove that they have less slope than it looks like they have by the statewide maps. So that's an option, or they can just rely on that data that's available.
Like, what would happen if you had, say, 8 feet, 30% grade, and the rest of it was maybe 10%, almost like a waterfall, and you want to develop there and use a grader to essentially make the whole thing 10%?
Yeah, and that's where you're getting at this, that you can disturb up to amounts. So say you did have that little bit of steep spot, you could disturb a couple, anywhere from 2, depending on the grade of it, 2 to 4,000 square feet in that area before you trigger that conditional use review. So that deals with the need to get over a short area of steep slopes that's preventing you to access more level land beyond that type of thing. And there is also some language in here that gives a little, room for things that do come into the conditional use review process, that the DRB would have a little room to allow for disturbance of those slopes within that range as well. So,
what about for like small ledges, particularly in like an urban area? For instance, when they built the new co-op, there was some ledge blasting that they had to do to bring that section down to make it level on the ground floor level. So, in more smaller restricted cases like that, what does this kind of allow?
It becomes a conditional use, right?
it just becomes a conditional use, and probably on these smaller lots, you're not going to trigger enough square footage to even trigger the conditional use. So,
Right.
say you were at, the 15 to 20% slope range, and that's the ledge that they were blasting out. You could blast out a 4,000 square foot area before you had to go even to conditional use review. So there is room there for those small lots.
Now, am I understanding this right, that it's saying that anything over 30%, they absolutely cannot
And that
do?
30% is pretty steep.
Yeah.
Like my driveway.
You have tow rope with that driveway?
I swear my parents is
Are
like
these
going
based
roller
on a
coaster.
certain, like, a road, like, is it based on an ecological principle of a certain amount of, like a certain area related to the slope and erosion or something? Or, like, where do the numbers come from in terms of the square feet and the...
Yeah, it comes from like an engineering slope stability perspective. When it gets too high, it's just presumed not to be stable.
And
Yeah, but I'm asking why 4,000 square feet instead of 3,000 square
Oh.
feet, or 2,000 instead of, 150 square feet.
so this language is based on a model, and I was trying to remember the exact source of my model. I think it's from my 21st Century Land Development Code book, which is just a model land use code, that those numbers come from. But we could adjust those. The idea, I think, would be to come up with numbers that balance the very need that, obviously on some sites you're going to need to get rid of some smaller areas of steep slopes that are on a site that's otherwise suitable. You don't want to make that unnecessarily difficult, so you want a number that there's enough room to get over those small sections. But on the other hand, if you're actually disturbing that, a certain amount of area, then you really are triggering the erosion issues and the changes in the drainage patterns issues and things like that. So I think that's where those numbers come from trying to balance those two concerns. It's not saying that there's a magic answer there at 4,000 and 3,000 and 2,000, but
And I think the question I have to help this along to some extent is that we're talking about all the development on a parcel. So we're talking about the cut and fill that would be required, to establish a driveway, for
Yes.
instance. So it's more based on my own experience. It's more that, you know, you may be able to, you know, you obtain a parcel or you identify a parcel, and you may be able to identify a relatively flat building site, but accessing the building site from the road could require traversing, you know, several little gullies or something, and each one of those is going to require filling in to some extent to make the road or the driveway manageable. And so it sets up a set of conditions, if you like, or a framework for the developer and the designer to try and figure out how best to go about accessing the building site within the context of the parcel, if you like. And so if you think about dirt roads and dirt driveways in particular, they are a major source of potential source, I should say, of erosion that can have downhill effects. So the impact of water running down a driveway and hitting a road, if it freezes once it hits the road, which is commonplace, then it creates a public hazard on the road, or if it contributes to the filling in of a public culvert or something. There's all these related public safety / environmental concerns about the impact of the erosion actually off-site over and above the potential impact on-site is what I try. And so while everyone here was thinking about, what about the co-op or what about the building site, it's actually important to think about access to the building as being probably the single biggest contributor to this problem, rather than the building site itself.
That would be probably in West Brattleboro, in the rural areas, that would be.
Yeah.
I mean, I know out on, off of, way off the Heinsberg Road, there's a private road that goes up.
Right.
Once you get up, there's 3 or 4 house lots up there, so, but it's their own private road. But I know from going up that road, after every rainstorm, it's a mess. You know, it just, the rain comes down and makes gullies
Right.
in it, and at the end of the winter, they have to pay to have it all
Rebuilt.
rebuilt. And it probably wasn't done right in the first place. I don't know. It's been
So
a
the
long
bottom line
time.
is at the moment we don't have any kind of standards like this. So this is at least a
We have-
baseline, and then in another 10 years we
You should
see if
have.
it
We should
works
say
or not.
we have road design standards,
Uh-huh.
but not, that doesn't govern driveways, and we don't have anything for building sites.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what this is going to fill in.
Yep. Brandy, can you, if you get a chance, figure out where you derived the
I
figures
can
from?
look, yeah, I wrote
'Cause
that
it-
down. I can
good.
find the precise source. I think they're from the Land Development Code, but the Model Land
Okay.
Development Code, but I'm not 100% sure. That's one of my
And is this,
major sources of inspiration.
Okay, good. All right.
from those of you who are on the DRB, is this easy to use? Easy probably isn't the right word, but usable,
I'm sure any
understandable. I mean, I'm not.
developer's engineer is going to be able to calculate that in a jiffy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And typically in these kinds of things, they come to us prepared with this analysis already done. And that's mostly from their benefit, because they want to get through the process as quick
Yeah.
as possible.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Well, yeah, and they also have to
Yeah.
they're also trying to establish the risk for their client,
Yeah.
right? I mean, so, you know, if it's a steep slope, they're obligated to look at it and go, you know, this is too steep, or you'd need to do this, or maybe you could, or maybe you couldn't. And it's also, the crunch is that any large amount of land work like this becomes expensive, and so you're definitely trying to minimize it from a cost standpoint as much as anything else.
Yeah.
And this also, because the definition of disturbance includes clearing of natural vegetation,
Yes.
this also helps with that sort of retaining
Right.
the forest cover, and all of that has contributions on the flooding aspects and water.
And it's actually
retention
really good to
aspects.
have these, because also for them, time is money, and if it's going to trigger a conditional use, if any part of it, that's more time that they need to devote to going through the permitting process. And so actually having these standards up front can help in a certain way, prevent people from violating them because they're not going to want to violate them or make it go down that
I mean,
road.
that is one of the concepts that we're moving forward with these regulations, is to try to come up with quantifiable standards wherever possible, for that reason, to be clear and upfront that this is, the performance that's expected, and it is clearer for the applicants. May look a little more scary up front when you look at it, but from the point of view of somebody trying to engineer a project, I think they'd probably rather see
Concrete numbers.
what it is that they need to achieve,
Right.
rather
Yeah.
than a standard that says you need to protect steep slopes,
Right.
and then come in and argue about what that means.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody's better off.
Right.
Does this make it difficult to construct a bridge?
This, in most cases, will not apply to constructing bridges, because nothing in here applies to work within a right-of-way.
No.
Well, there's
A
two.
road
Yeah,
right
right.
away.
There's two aspects to that. In the first instance, yes, it doesn't apply to anything in the right of way. Secondly, even if it is a private road or a driveway, and there are some driveways that require bridges, if the stream is mapped, you'll require a stream alteration permit from the state. And if the stream is not mapped,
Build your bridge.
That means too little,
yeah,
maybe too small.
mapped means named, and there's not a lot that's not named.
Yeah.
So,
But then it's considered floodway.
well, not everything that's named and mapped is
Flood.
Mapped for flood hazard. So the section of Sackett's Brook that's in our backyard, for instance, is not. But so in that instance, the abutment and the approach, each side of the bridge would count towards disturbance. But you could make a kind of a mathematical argument that the stuff that's suspended in the air is not disturbing anything. I would probably accept that.
Yeah, I think you'd be looking at what's on the
Yeah.
the ground, the footing.
So it's the abutments and the footings for the bridge on either side.
you do to the earth on either side.
Right, and you'd have to be really keen to be on the other side of the bridge to pony up the money for a bridge. It's just, other than on the road.
And of course, James, you'd want a covered bridge.
Actually, there's a nice line in used covered bridges. If give us a yell, we'll find you a nice used covered bridge.
Very happy to see that line that the people down there in Guilford were a little bit more intelligent than some neighboring towns.
Okay.
Okay. Anything further on the steep slopes? Nope. Going and gone. Okay. Moving on to erosion control, and like I said, these are all interrelated. So this section 332 runs through the requirements for having. First of all, there's sort of two aspects. One is that you have to control erosion on your construction site. This is a state requirement. It's a town requirement. It has to be done. So there is some information in here about what's expected, just in general. And then there is a set of standards and criteria for when an engineered erosion control plan has to be submitted as part of an application. So there's things that require a state permit, and those generally involve an acre or more of disturbance. So there are still significant but smaller projects that aren't requiring state permits. So this is written to try to capture those, particularly the ones that would either be disturbing a large amount of land or will be disturbing land on slopes. So those are the things that are going to trigger needing a erosion control plan that's actually engineered as part of the application.
Did we define construction activities somewhere?
That is a good question, whether the word construction activity is defined. It may not be at this point, but I can put it on my list.
I think we should have some kind of delineation there.
So I would take construction activity to mean the point at which you start disturbing the earth. So oftentimes driveways mysteriously appear but prior to the permitting process, so that is a key aspect of erosion control, as we've already discussed, the road and driveway access.
So any land disturbance would constitute construction?
No,
Well-
because you can disturb the land for gardening.
Yeah. Development that's associated with land development, I would
Yeah,
say. Yes.
activity related to land development. I know this is going to sound ridiculously pedantic, but we have been treated to a presentation from an attorney from up north that challenged the whole notion of the zoning bylaw on the basis that we didn't define gardening and distinguish it from anything else, and either we were going to have to view all gardening activity as in violation of the zoning ordinance, or determine that in fact gardening was not.
And I think we
land
actually
development.
dealt with
That
that.
is-
It was
that is one lawyer who needs more cases.
no, it's not exactly what you think. Yeah. So. And unfortunately, Brandy knows exactly what
I
I'm
know who
talking
you're
about.
talking about.
Is there any, I have two questions. Is there any need to correlate between when the erosion control plan is required and when the disturbance or clearing of steep slopes triggers?
The conditional use review,
Because they're different.
they are different, and there's a stormwater one too. So that one comes along as well, and sort of has some other numbers that are going along with it. I would say that the difference between the steep slopes one and the erosion control one is that the erosion control does fall down to lower slope land.
Right.
So it's not just the significant ones. And I hadn't thought that much about, and I see that this one runs off of up to 25%, and the other one runs to off of 30 as being prohibited. So this, maybe I do need to go back and forth and correlate them a little more closely. But these numbers come off of work that I did previously for Cabot, and in conjunction with the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission. They did the same project that your Regional Planning Commission is doing now about green infrastructure and low impact development a year or so ago, and so that's where these numbers came out of, is where we sort of ended up after going through that process with them in terms of how much disturbance and on the slopes. So that's where these originated.
It just seems confusing. I mean, it seems like if there were a threshold level, it might be nice to just have it be the same for both, so that that threshold is either triggering both, kind of both considerations, or I don't know.
I think with the erosion control, it seems like the standard would be lower because the potential threats are higher. Like, for instance, like with the development itself, this is talking, I believe, if I'm correct, this is just with is this just the building itself?
Which one are you looking at?
No, it
The
can be the
disturbance, the steep slope?
The
Could be
the
around.
disturbance of steep slopes would be
All
how
activity?
much, all activities,
Yes.
so how much basically earth you've just moved or disturbed
On the
or
whole
cleared
parcel.
on the whole parcel for
Yeah.
all of the development related activities.
But isn't the erosion control, isn't that a wider standard? Because it doesn't necessarily have to be moving earth, it could be any sort of...
It's really is sort of the same trigger in terms of activity, I think, but it's the question of roughly, not quite exactly the same, but the erosion control is different in terms of it's just saying when you need to submit a plan, an engineered plan, to go along with your application, whereas the steep slopes is actually setting up an alternative review process for things that are disturbing larger areas of slope.
So in some situations, you might have to do both.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, I think it's almost impossible to imagine a situation where you're applying for some special, where you're being reviewed for steep slope disturbance and not erosion control.
Yeah.
But I think there are some situations where you could
That's the
be
other way.
getting reviewed for erosion control and it's not about steep slopes.
Right, right.
It's just about how much earth you're going to have exposed at
Right.
one time.
And how much earth you
Flat.
disturb and move around. I mean, 'cause
Right.
you could have a fairly, I won't say really level, but
Right.
not much incline, and you start moving stuff around, and you can create
A big impact.
a
Right.
big impact there. Would
Right.
create, that could create erosion, and we would need, it wouldn't be a steep slope necessarily
No.
within that
No.
guideline.
So, and the key thing here is that we're not talking about just the construction phase, because that is a requirement at the state level that during construction you make special accommodations to prevent erosion and silting and so forth. There's silt fences and hay bales that you often see.
No more hay bales, they've been canceled.
We don't have hay bales.
They're no longer considered a-
Those wussy little fences.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Oh, that's reassuring. Anyway, making a mammoth effort to control erosion during construction, and but the question could be, yeah, exactly as Carolina points out, you could have a large in the area, fairly gentle slope, but due to certain features associated with that slope, like you just denuded it, it could be vulnerable to erosion, or it could be, although gentle, above a brook or a road, or
Right.
you know,
To create runoff
or
anyways.
a neighbor's parcel, right? And for whatever reason, is now constitutes an erosion hazard potentially. So, but not be steep.
Might it not make sense to add demolition to our construction activities? Because that doesn't necessarily dig into the dirt. But
Well, if you're removing a foundation, that could potentially change.
We generally deem demolition in the existing zoning ordinance as a form of land development, and and it requires a permit.
if we're going to say that construction activities means digging in the dirt,
Right. It should include demolition.
I'm inclined to agree.
Miss New Jersey.
That took a really long time, but it was worth it.
I have two more questions.
Yeah.
So
I'm disinclined to hear them, but okay.
on 332B,
Madam Chair.
I'm just, so you referenced the low risk site handbook for erosion prevention and sediment control, and then we list like specific erosion control practices. Is there any possible contradiction in that?
No, these are the
From it.
they're the general guide. These are the general principles that are in the low risk site handbook, and then there's more specific guidance in the handbook under each of these.
So okay, so this is sort of you're naming it, and then the handbook is like
This is
here you can get
yeah.
more detailed.
This is the one-page summary of the 10-page booklet.
Okay.
You're speaking about the erosion now.
Yeah,
All these
the
different
erosion control
practices.
practices. Yeah.
3-38.
And then my other
Yeah.
question is the number 9, that 332D number 9.
Mhm.
It's very because of the seasonal stuff. It's left so open ended. Is there a way to tighten that, or can you not because it's based on the Vermont
There.
lines?
Yeah, and that is something I could go back and relook at exactly what the booklet says, but I think the booklet gives some flexibility for dealing, because there's just the reality of the matter is that you're not going to be able to establish
Right.
cover during those months. There are things you can do, but it's not necessarily going to be growing green grass on it. The state's permitting system tries to avoid having things opened up that will be left opened over those months as much as possible, but that's, I think, the approach the state takes, is to just try to minimize what's going to be left by the end of October that won't.
And I feel like
But
I've
you
seen
could-
a lot of other places, though, where this mid-October to mid-April seems to be pretty standard.
Oh, that's
ground's
the
frozen, it's
standard
not gonna
time
move,
frame,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
But in terms of, what you can require be done, it's sort of dependent on what the condition of the ground is at the present time, whether there's been snow or hasn't been snow, or
Right.
how wet it is or not wet it is. So it requires some level of professional responsibility on the part of the people out there doing the work, but
Yeah.
you can't really precisely.
Say you must do this because it's about.
You have to respond to the
I
conditions.
should say that larger scale construction projects, or even smaller ones, the sort of customary practice of not building between October and April, it's kind of moot. It's more of a certainly, so when I talked to people from Housing Vermont, they said they grudgingly acknowledge that between Christmas and New Year is not good, but that's about the week they don't do it. They're just on.
Yeah.
And so there's ways, so it's a scheduling issue and a sequencing of stages and events are clearly not going to be inclined to dig into the ground. But it's not inconceivable that you can dig and do things.
No, because once you get below the frost line, you're okay.
You're totally fine. And so a decent machine will break through the
Yeah.
frost if it's not too deep. It's a question of how much time you want to spend doing it.
Yeah, it's not.
It takes more time, and to get back to David's point, time is money, but I wouldn't say there's a physical constraint. I think the other part about it, though, is that the ground that remains undisturbed is frozen and is therefore not vulnerable to moving around very much. It's actually, there's some benefits to doing it at that time of year because
Yeah,
everything
that's
that you're
true.
not
It's not
touching is stuck. Yeah.
I have a question on item 12 about native species, the must. I mean, that doesn't bother me any, but is that going to be an issue? For some people, is that a new kind of thing that's being added in?
It is something that you're starting to see appear more and more
mean, we talked
because
about
of
this
the
when we did
issues
the
with the
town plan, so-
invasives. Is to try to put in.
Is that going to trip people up at all? The musts
I
used?
can't imagine there would be an obstacle to using native species. I mean, they're available,
cheaper.
so it's just,
Yeah.
It's also more, in a lot of cases, more environmentally friendly because you're.
Yeah, I don't have a question with it. I just,
Yeah,
Is
you
that
can
one
certainly
that's
get a
gonna develop
native
or
grass mix, seed mix without a problem to use. So
Yeah, I mean, does the local conservation mix qualify as native species? I guess it basically does. Yeah. So the default landscapey bulk seeding stuff is what they call conservation
grass,
mix,
yeah.
and it's a pretty hardy. I mean, it's nothing special, but it's not bad.
Stormwater.
yeah, so actually, 12 and 13, I think, are additions to the low risk handbook. These are things that aren't in it. Those are, I believe, 2 elements that came out of the project in Central Vermont. So from my list.
I like them.
yeah, I like them too,
I
but
think. Actually, no, 13, Kim added. Your regional planning commission added.
Kim Smith,
Yes.
333. Yes.
333? Move on to stormwater? Okay. So this stormwater management, like the erosion control, is aimed at coming up with standards for the projects that fall below the state permitting requirements but are still significant enough to merit properly taking care of the stormwater. So they are, and that's once again sort of like an acre disturbance type of cutoff that typically comes in on when it needs a state permit. And the model I used here is actually a model from the state of Rhode Island for using LID, low impact development approaches, and with some input from your regional planning commission on their review of this as part of that green infrastructure project. So this runs off of how much impervious surface you're creating, so not land disturbance, but off of impervious surface. And I did put in the definition here of impervious surface just as a point, I think, to really emphasize to people that this does include gravel, it does include other types of surfaces other than asphalt that are so compacted or constructed as to not allow water to infiltrate into them.
Is there a reference for low-impact development and green stormwater infrastructure,
Like a guidebook or something?
state policies?
We do reference in paragraph E the Vermont Low Impact Development Guide for residential and small sites. That's the main one that's used in Vermont. But there are a number of excellent low impact development references out there at this point. So there's a lot of them floating around.
So what is green stormwater infrastructure actually?
It approaches to managing
Oh, yeah, you
stormwater.
have this whole chart back
Yeah,
here.
yes.
Do you want to move that to where you first mentioned it?
Well, so the charts right now are sitting in the back of the sections,
Yeah.
like we talked about last time.
Oh,
I
right.
am going to incorporate them with the text when I do the final layout. But
Great.
right now they're hanging at the back.
Great.
And actually, this big section in the middle under LID practices,
Yeah.
as my footnote states, is going to move to the appendices. So all this description of what some of these things are, but I left it in here once again just for the ease of our review as we're going through it. So this section will not be this long, so that whole section E will be moving to the appendices. So the charts will be a lot closer to the meat of the
Great.
text.
Right, okay.
And they'll be included with. So just to walk through in a little bit of order here, the applicability component is important to think about at what point you want to trigger the stormwater management. I think we talked about that a little bit in some of the previous, looking at the zoning districts, when you want to trigger having to bring sites that might have stormwater problems now into conformance. So where we have landed in this language is that if you're adding an accessory structure, that isn't going to trigger this section. If you're changing the use of a portion of a building, that's not going to trigger this section. But otherwise, if you're changing the use of an entire building, or you are extending the amount of impervious surface on a site, or making other modifications, that is going to trigger a retrofit, needing to try to do, to the maximum extent feasible, bring the site into conformance with these regulations.
Is the intent here to say that a change is exempt for a portion of any building, or changes to an entire single or two-family dwelling are exempt?
I think the plan, yes, the plan was to exempt single and two-family. I think as I'm trying to remember back to the conversation Sue and I were having as we were trying to bounce this back and forth a couple of times.
Because we don't do site plan review
Right,
for one
for
or
no
two
site
family
plan,
dwellings.
so that should be clear.
And you should remember, under state statute, one and two family dwellings are exempt from site plan review. So, which
So-
probably causes more problems than it solves.
So they should probably be in the category of a single and two-family dwelling wouldn't trigger this unless you were increasing the impervious surface.
I just think it could be read the wrong way.
Yeah, I think you're right that I think we played with this language
Yeah.
one too many times and we still ended up with a poorly written sentence.
Well, I mean, it's just, if you
Yeah.
conjugate them with and,
Yeah,
changing the use
yeah.
of a portion of the building or any change,
Yeah.
and any changes to one or two family dwellings are exempt.
Yeah, I will clarify that. There's also, under paragraph C, a provision and a recognition that in the urban center districts of downtown, full conformance with low-impact development is not going to be possible on most sites. There just isn't the land area to do many of these types of practices. So the town does have public work specifications that deal with the stormwater component. So I never really did get to the explanation, but the green infrastructure and low impact development stuff is all about treating the stormwater in a way other than just putting it in a pipe and getting it off your property as soon as possible, to try to clean the water, remove sediment, try to infiltrate. The level to which you can do that depends, of course, on the conditions, the available area you have, and the soil conditions you have, and things like that. But to try to reduce how much water is immediately piped to the nearest receiving water and pushed down to be somebody else's problem.
I think the other challenge for densely settled areas in the northern, snow belt of the country is that period of time of the year when natural processes aren't able to function very well because the ground,
But the ground is frozen, but yet there's a lot of water on top.
Yes, otherwise known as ice, and so a lot of the bioretention and those kinds of functions don't really work very well without a lot of area.
Are the town's public works specifications ever changed? Like, where do they come from? Are they reviewed?
They're chiseled on big chunks of
Granted.
Yeah.
Local granite.
Yes, of course. Very granite. No.
Sorry, segue.
Yeah, it's okay. I couldn't tell you. I know that there are periodic reviews, and the question. It's one of those challenges. Most of downtown Brattleboro has a really old stormwater system, and so it wouldn't necessarily meet contemporary standards. So
it just runs straight into the brook.
a lot of it is straight piped to the brook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brick, right?
It's all everything.
What's that?
It's
Isn't it
everything.
brick inside?
It's like clay. It's everything.
Oh no, the section outside the post office is wood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different
Wow.
pipes going on.
Yeah, wooden pipes, carved wooden
Anyway,
pipe.
that's
It's all right.
curious.
You're not joking. That's actually.
So
I'm not.
that would be why
No,
it floods
yeah.
so often.
It's like- yeah, and then there's pipe ratios that are too small.
Yeah.
Way too small.
Yeah.
Because they
Right.
didn't anticipate anyone paving over it when they did it.
Whatever
Horse and
stand.
buggies.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
didn't. I mean, it was from a time when they used to roll the snow to compact it, so that horses could walk on it rather than actually shovel. Basically, effectively shovel it up, which is what they do now. And that was in place. This is really bizarre, but a guy retired from Public Works in the last 10 years who can remember being on the crew that rolled rather than
Wow.
plowed.
Wow.
Yeah. How's that?
Cool.
That's pretty cool.
That's cool.
Right.
Well, this is rural Vermont, of course.
Yes.
So paragraph E just is a descriptive section that describes what these various things are, and like I said, we're going to move that to the appendices. But there are some elements of this, so things like the green roof and the stormwater planters.
Stormwater planet would be good.
The stormwater planters. That actually can be incorporated into an urban environment. So there are some possibilities, but it's certainly not going to be the 100% solution for stormwater management in downtown. So that's the reason for that.
Now, oh, sorry, I don't know if we're there yet. When you get to 324, I have a question.
Okay, so figure 323. This is set up so that there's a basic standard that if your lot meets it, you don't have to do anything further. So for a single-family residential lot, if you haven't disturbed more than 15,000 square feet and you have more than 7,500 square feet that's impervious, and there's at least 25% that's natural area, and there's buffers if there needs to be a downslope for water features, that type of thing, then you've complied under the basic compliance and you don't need to do anything further. Otherwise, you have to be able to demonstrate that you're going to be implementing.
Well, single or
these others.
two-family residences are not under review at all.
They would still, the retrofit component we've decided will only trigger on those things that come in for site plan review, because that would be their point of capture. But for a new house that was coming in for a zoning permit, or for a major expansion or something like that, for a zoning permit, these will apply for a single family at that point. But not so much on the
Maybe that
retrofit.
needs like a box or something, because
Okay.
most people think they're home free, a single or two-family house.
Yeah, I mean, although it says that in that shaded box at the top of figure
Yeah.
323, that might need a little more amplification.
I think that back to that applicability section, I need to work on that some further.
Okay, so so
that
you're
makes
thinking
it clear.
about,
It makes it more clear when.
so that would be
That's
to be
back up.
333B?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll work on that language and I'll try to emphasize when a single family. I think
Yeah.
that dealt with the retrofits. We were talking about exempting them from trying to be retrofit. What exists
Right.
today can exist, but for increases in impervious surface or for new development, these standards would apply.
Okay.
I'm probably misunderstanding this, but would this prevent a rural, say, single-family home from clearing a large area?
It
If you're just clearing it to clear it?
No, it would. It would not. That's not the intent anyway. And I think you're looking at that disturbed area, and you're remembering my definition of disturbed previously that said clearing of vegetation.
Yes.
And I think in this case, we may need to work on that because I don't think that that's how disturbed should be interpreted here. I think that disturbed should mean we've actually exposed the earth.
I mean, you could also just say, clearing the lot is okay. Clearing doesn't count.
Another question. Would agriculture be exempted?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
So like if someone built a house and a barn,
The house would require to meet the regulations. The house is not exempt agriculture, but the barn could be a farm structure and could be exempt from regulation altogether.
There's no minimum size, is there?
For a barn,
Farm.
for a farm structure, you can technically apply the number of critters, a
Right.
standard.
Yes. So in other words, you can have a pretty small, key point here is you can have a small house and a small parcel and still qualify, and
Yes.
if you
And
take the
very
appropriate
large
steps,
You
qualify
could
as a
have
farm.
some quail and,
Yes.
and meet the definition of a farm.
Or you could raise bean sprouts.
for sale.
If you sell enough of these
And you
bean
raise-
sprouts.
So,
With a grow
so
light.
agriculture is
Among other things.
completely exempted. I mean, so they don't have to do erosion control or.
They have to follow accepted agricultural practices, which are written to ensure high quality water.
Yep. Or not.
Well, because I'm just thinking, like, if someone, a lot of barns now, they aren't dirt floors anymore. They're cement floors, and some barns now, newer, larger industrial farm practices are quite enormous.
When was the last time anybody built a new barn in Brattleboro?
Oh, God, probably not forever, but it does happen.
Cheese factory.
Well, yeah, was that?
It's quite a
so
barn.
They didn't have to do anything.
People build barns here all the time.
I'm just fascinated that there's absolutely, I mean, I understand the idea that we want to perpetuate agriculture, but that there's absolutely no overview on how they're doing that, especially for industrial farms.
There's the kind of nursery school book version of farming, which tends to inform the state's regulatory matrix for agricultural activity, and then there's actual agricultural activity, which may have significant land use impacts that need to be mitigated, and that is not generally very well covered by state statute.
Actually, there was a very, sorry, on a quick aside, there was a very good article in the Burlington Free Press today about how the EPA came down and told the state that they need to, that moving forward, they're going to have to finally face the reality that they're going to have to come down hard on farmers because most of the runoff, the phosphorus, is coming from farms.
Right.
And that their requirements are 20% higher than what the state goals set for reducing phosphorus in that lake. So
Yeah.
you should read that if anyone
That
cares
sounds
to.
very interesting, thank you.
Yes.
Yep.
Sorry for the aside.
Yep. So I don't know if we have any agricultural practices of that scale and scope that would present those problems. The other one to include in here actually is forestry activity, silviculture. And there are, fairly significant impacts. There can be significant impacts from that also, and that largely goes.
Well, they're best management practices.
That's right.
For water quality on logging jobs in Vermont.
Right.
Yeah.
I had a separate question on the 324.
Yes.
The matrix. I was a little surprised that green roofs for single or two-family homes was found to be unsuitable, because I have been to I think two in the area, single-story or single-family homes that actually have green roofs on them. So I was just a little surprised to find that was considered unsuitable.
It's just assuming peaked roofs.
Yeah, I mean, I think you certainly can put a green roof on a single family home. I have a feeling that the reason that they are listed in this as not being very suitable is that unless you've built the house for that,
Yeah. The weight load.
the weight load and the function of it it's not something you can convert most roofs to.
Yeah.
And I think it also while I have seen some sloped roofs that have vegetation growing on
Wouldn't that be this true for any other kind of building, though? I mean, why is it okay in a multifamily and not a single family? I mean, that's the part that.
Well, I guess the assumption then, based on
It's sort
what
of
you
a
said,
scale.
is that with the multi, it would be built to withstand that.
Yeah, and I think it might also be thinking about the scale of it as
I
well.
think there's sort of an implicit cost consideration or something. I don't know.
I mean, I think we could perhaps change it to possibly suitable,
Yeah.
I'd like to be
non-suitable,
possibly suitable.
Yeah, I would too.
but
I want to build one.
But it's not, I'm not, my thing's all black, so I can't read all the fine print. But the suitable or possibly suitable, these are just recommendations.
Yes, they
for, so,
Right.
ultimately if someone's designing their house and they want it,
they could do
they
it. They could do it.
It's
Sure.
not like you're saying they can't.
No, the bigger 324 is supposed to sort of be guidance as to what
Things to look into
Yeah.
that would be appropriate for that
kind of setting.
yeah.
This is all for previously existing, isn't it?
There is a column for existing development, and then the single and two and the multifamily and non-residential, I think, is to be new
Okay.
development.
Oh, well, then all the more reason why a green roof
Yeah.
should be suitable.
For a new one,
Right.
or could be suitable. Especially if someone wants to build a very modernist home somewhere in the country.
The ones that I've seen are not, I guess, not too far from here are sort of those post and beam berm houses built in up, sort of with the northern wall bermed, so that and then
Oh, kind of like naturally.
and heavy wood members, and then the grass on the berm just continues right over and forms the roof of the house. There's a couple of those around.
Yeah.
And there's an underground house in Westminster West.
So
How do you
I mean, I think one of the reasons they may have
Been inside.
I could see that one of the reasons that model may have listed that as unsuitable is that I'm not sure that the sod roof like that is really as effective a stormwater thing as you might think, because the green roofs
Right.
that are meant to do stormwater have very special medium that's put in to
Right.
hold moisture and then slowly release it to the plants and things like that. So they're all built out of highly engineered material mediums.
And then so that also then there's an increase in the technology and a reduction in the weight. So they have these little mats that are loaded with nutrients, and that's what grows the cover. It gets fairly complex.
Yeah.
And then the good old funky hippie one is just like put some dirt on your roof.
Let the goat go up there and show it.
And the goat's going to keep the grass down, so it's all cool. That's the one I like.
Okay.
So,
Wow, well, that's fine. 'Cause it's,
Yep. So Westminster West for you, David. I think that's it.
Okay. We'll leave it to the rural areas.
Right, real rural.
Wacky. Those compostable toilet people out there. Love it.
So section 334, this deals with the riparian areas. As you may remember, we have riparian setbacks in the various zoning districts. This riparian area is a 100-foot setback, and we need to make some final sort of determination on exactly which water bodies is going to cover.
All of them.
Well, that's one possibility. All of them is one possibility. Right now, you have you have the overlay, and the regulations. They only cover sort of the major waterways. There is a strong argument to be made for doing the smaller waterways and trips, because in reality, the buffer and the natural vegetation on those is far more effective at mitigating flooding than doing the same once you get down on the major streams. So that is a bit of a question, is to sort of determine and map what waterways this is going to apply to.
Could it be based on what is it when the size, like an order?
Yeah, there is an
like
order.
the first
Stream order,
second order or
right?
something?
So, right, yes.
I mean, that would seem like the most standard way to sort of, pick an order of stream.
So,
Of course, that can change.
But Brandy's point
Well,
was
No,
really
I
that
think
the
it's a bit-
reverse
takes a bit.
is more important.
actually, yeah,
Because the runoff comes from the little
ones.
and builds and builds.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How different is this than the old fluvial erosion hazard mitigation overlay?
It's fairly different in detail, but very similar in goal and concept, I guess, is what it comes down to.
I think we should do it everywhere then.
So that's the one issue, is where, this 100 feet. So we have the 100-foot zone, and then we have the setback zone, which, if you remember, varied anywhere from 10 to 50 feet, depending on the zoning district and whether the lot was developed or undeveloped. So this section then sets up what happens to the riparian area within that setback, and then what happens to the remainder of the riparian area that's beyond the setback. So in the area that's beyond the setback, that's what we're covering here in C. That can be used for recreation uses, for some of your stormwater purposes, for water-dependent things, so things that, in order to function, have to actually be over, near, by, on the water. And that type of thing can go on within the area beyond the setback. And then within the setback, there's limitations on how much clearing of natural vegetation there can be. So there's sort of more precise
Right,
standards.
and the key distinction, to get back to your point, James, is that the fluvial erosion hazard area or layer, if you're thinking about it as a map, was in recognition of hazard risk, and the motivation for this section, I don't believe is the same thing, although it would have a mitigating effect and minimize the amount of private property development that could take place close to the brook
And
or close to a waterway.
You can still build a bridge here?
Still build a bridge. A bridge counts as a water-dependent structure.
Should we just get him one?
I love a bridge, but
Yes.
I remember that issue coming up.
Lawyers are always building bridges.
So,
It's a good thing.
I mean, one of the main ideas behind this is to try to maintain
bridges.
or establish woody vegetation along these stream corridors,
Right.
and to keep new structures
back from the.
Yeah,
Yep.
well, that's why I think it's important that we use all streams, because we have this land use goal, an environmental goal that we're trying to achieve, and we should stick to it.
My only concern with this was, in particular, certain parts of the urban center where 100 feet would
Yep.
would render some people's properties
Yep.
basically unusable moving
Which
forward.
is where we come down to the part E here, the previously developed sites. So there is a mechanism here for dealing with buildings that are already within the setback,
Right.
and for sites that are already developed in those within those setbacks. But it does put down this marker that you're not going to be able to go beyond if you've got an undeveloped site at this point in those core areas.
What if someone has, like, let's say someone has a property, it is within the 100 feet buffer, and they have a building there, and the building is just no good anymore. If they wanted to, say, take the building down and put a building within the same footprint, not expanding its size, or possibly even shrinking it slightly, would they be able to do that? Or if that building were to be rendered unusable and it had to be torn down, would they now be stuck with a property that they can't use?
I'm just rereading my language precisely here so I can answer. But yes, the intent would be that you could rebuild within the footprint of what you have. You couldn't
Yes.
move any closer and intrude any further in to what you have, except as, there is a little bit of flexibility built into here for having some outdoor space that's usable, hard surface.
But then do you have to
seating.
conform to, I'm thinking of like the Marina restaurant, when they rebuilt on the same footprint basically, but they had to allow for
Well,
flood stuff heights for their foundation.
yeah, I should say that the important thing about this, and the important point that David raises, is any stream in an urban or already developed part of Brattleboro actually probably is mapped for special flood hazard area. I say probably because I'm just thinking it through. Certainly the Whetstone is mapped all the way to the Connecticut, and so also is the Crosby. And I can't think of a section of the Crosby. I mean, there's tiny little parts of the Crosby where it's not that big of a deal, but for the most part, there's areas, and certainly the West River, so the Marina example that you're citing. What really guided that project's engineering was that it was in a special flood hazard area, and the pre-existing restaurant, when it burnt down, was non-conforming. And so they used the same footprint, but they raised it up.
Yeah.
And so now it is 1 foot above base flood elevation,
Yeah.
and so it's okay. And all they did was, I say all, it was expensive and difficult, but they
Yeah.
poured new footings and got up further out of the ground.
What
So
about
would that trigger in the kind of instance that what David's talking
No, I
about,
don't believe
they
so,
have to
because they use the same.
conform?
They basically use the same footprint. So just that the elevation is higher, but the footprint is much the same.
So, it's interesting that I don't know if those were made after, but I found it surprising when the New England Youth Theater was allowed to be built so close to the Whetstone. But they apparently
They put those floodgates.
they were built
It's not
with
the floodgates that does it for them, actually. I mean, that's one part of it.
Well,
But
their foundation is, it's very high. It's like 3 feet. You look at the building, there's like 3 feet of cement.
that is to anchor the building so that it doesn't float away. I'm not kidding. There
It
is.
worked.
Well, but yes, it worked. So they met design requirements that come from the special flood hazard area requirements, but arguably, you could imagine that you were starting with a blank slate, or imagine we could go back in time and they were considering that project and they had this zoning bylaw to address, and they were thinking about other things. They may have been encouraged to place the building at the front of the lot up against the street, and then use various landscaping techniques to make the rear of the parcel open space and usable for most of the time and most of the year, but also robust enough to withstand floodwaters. So they could have made a series of, like a series of, what am I thinking of?
Terraces?
Like terraces, like a Greek theater. A series of narrow terraces that would have actually worked for people to sit on most of the year round, and then because of the way it was constructed, be able to withstand floodwaters or something. But they made a set of choices that were different from that. So, all I'm trying to identify here is that if you read this and you take away, the takeaway that you get is sort of try and move away from the stream as much as practical. Think about ways in which you're going to work with the stream. That would lead to different design choices from the ones that were pursued. And it's a sound building, and it's constructed properly, and it meets all the prevailing requirements. The way it does it is it uses a very large amount of weight in the form of a very deep concrete foundation that anchors the building so that it doesn't lift up literally and move down the brook, which is a risk if it's confronted with water coming from upstream against that wall. And then the use of floodgates, which were effective, but that was a choice.
But they had the same choice, for example, that the co-op had, and the co-op chose to build against the street.
And up and out a little. So that funny little bump, the part of the rising up as you enter the co-op, it's very subtle and it works as a sort of a pedestrian control thing. But they're actually addressing some elevation issues with the special flood hazard area there.
I knew that. Because, our old store flooded.
That's right. And so and that costs some money.
Yeah.
But, it's done in because every one of these choices has, merit, some demerit points. But
the brook on Putney, that is the Crosby Brook.
The Crosby,
right? Yeah. So that would be another example of, and that one, I don't know how bad that was with Irene. I don't think it.
I was on Putney Road the afternoon of Irene, and there was nothing to talk about.
But 100 feet on either side of that little brook is.
Yeah, but
that's like that's whole property.
No, those are surprisingly big parcels for the most part. The issue that actually is present there, which is different and interesting and important to think about, is that it's on the list for impaired. And so we
do, but I don't. My fear is rendering people's properties unusable to an extent.
The gas stations, the Citgo and the Mobil, are either side of the Crosby Brook right now, and a 100-foot buffer on those two sites would present some interesting challenges, but I wouldn't say it renders them useless. Maybe the Mobil's a little bit more impacted than the Citgo. And then don't believe it would necessarily, if you were to scrape off what is now the new pizza shop, it was Bickford's, it's still usable. The Friendly site is still usable, as is the parcel immediately behind it.
But they'd be restricted to their current footprint.
The way they would probably approach it is that they would persist with the current footprint. I might add that the level of erosion that's obvious to the naked eye between Friendly's and Raimundo's, and it's disturbing to say the least. There's slope failures all the way through there. It's actually in pretty bad shape, and it goes like that until and I think the other thing that I would say here is we are dealing with a developed area, and so the applicant does have this mechanism for saying that they either want to employ the existing footprint or explore other approaches to solving the problem. But I don't believe that necessarily invalidates the application of this. And I think the other thing that the community is going to have to address over the longer term is actually how to approach sections of brooks such as that, including the whetstone, from a sort of a project approach, and start dealing with it as an urban stream that's subject to flooding and has stormwater issues and other water quality issues associated with it. Because so far we haven't really addressed it such as that. We've applied the special flood hazard area regulations, and you get outcomes like the New England Youth Theatre and the Co-op, which are fine and are reasonable interpretations of the rules, but it's not seeing the brook as a working system.
Is it possible that it would make sense to exempt the Connecticut River to preserve the developability of the backside of downtown?
No, because it's already subject to a 250-foot buffer,
You
effectively.
can't develop anything in there?
You can develop. There's a buffer on the Connecticut River already.
You could have a nice walkway.
Interesting. But you can't put a ice cream shack on it, huh?
Resort hotel.
The latest river corridor guidance, there's likely to be an exemption for downtowns and designated downtowns. But I should say that there's been a buffer in place for the Connecticut River for some time.
And the West River as well, right?
And the West River, yeah, exactly. Because that was in play for the West River Park. But the key thing there, again, is from the high water mark inland, 100 feet. I know it looks really close, but it's probably not getting you much further away from the river's edge than the railroad tracks.
Yeah. I
You
mean,
know?
there was still, when Irene happened and I went down near the Connecticut to see what it was like on the Connecticut, it was higher, but there was still quite a bit before it would breach any sort of land
Yeah.
on our side.
It's controlled.
Yeah, it's controlled.
It's controlled. So it was at the top
Maybe
of
we
its.
should tell the people at home that when there's a tropical storm, you shouldn't go out to the river and see what it looks like.
Well, I made sure I stayed a safe distance away.
You're here to tell a
I was
tale.
on the bridges that were still open to the public.
Okay, that's good. So, but I think, with all due respect, James, I think the single biggest challenge for getting any kind of development going between the Connecticut and, I guess, Route 5, Main Street, is in fact access and the railroad tracks and the power lines.
Well, there's a little bit down there near the gas works, and there's been talk of maybe putting in some sort of river interpretation center.
Yeah, people do need it interpreted for them.
This is the river.
It's wet.
It's wet.
But you're right.
mineral gas
But
property.
the buffer thing would apply to the section south of the Hinsdale Bridge.
Soon to be the former Hinsdale Bridge.
Soon to be.
Or
2018.
the Hinsdale pedestrian bridge.
It'll be the Hinsdale pedestrian bridge. Yep.
So
Where does the
anything,
end of the urban development corridor end?
Well, the urban centre district ends just at the point of that little parcel of land where the empty building is, the archery building, and then the parcel immediately to the south, which is the Merrill tank farm, is zoned industrial.
Oh,
But under here,
Currently.
it's gonna be.
It'll
Wouldn't
become
change.
It'll become mixed.
mixed.
What is that? Mixed
Yeah,
use.
mixed use.
Yeah.
Yeah, it becomes mixed use.
and then could we extend the urban center designation to further south?
You mean the downtown and well, you could. The state is disinclined to expand downtown areas for their own reasons, but you certainly could explore that. Yep.
Okay. Back on track. So,
okay. So anything else in terms of the riparian areas section for discussion? No. Okay, so we've got one remaining here, the wetland and vernal pool section. Right now, your regulations don't have anything specific in them. Wetlands obviously are mentioned as a natural feature and need to be shown on plans and protected and things like that, but there's no specific provisions. There is state permitting that deals with the class 1 and 2 wetlands.
Are wetlands mapped?
Yes,
But,
class
yeah,
1 and
it's-
2 wetlands are mapped. However, when you actually go out in the field and somebody looks for wetlands, there's surprisingly more of them than are actually mapped.
Yeah.
Yeah. We should have definitions of both things here, don't you think?
Yeah, and I would say vernal pools they move around too, don't they?
They're ephemeral.
Yeah.
You just wanted to say it, didn't you? As bad as Rebecca.
At this point, I think the conversation I had with Sue is that there aren't any mapped vernal pools at this point. But if the town did more of a natural resource inventory at some point, there may be vernal pools that show up. So that's, I did leave them in there for
So
that reason.
or as delineated in the field by
Conservation
qualified
Commission.
professional. So if there was a question, the town or an interested group that's not the property owner could delineate it.
Well, if it was coming in from an application point of view, typically the board would require a delineation be done by the applicant.
Yes. And it's usually the
A third party
It-
qualified.
the applicant
Not by
is.
the applicant. The applicant would be like, yeah, that's not.
Well, the applicant hires a professional who's willing to stamp
yeah,
the
yeah.
map and say these are where the vernal pools are.
Right.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
So, under the guidelines, number 2 says to avoid filling wetlands or vernal pools. Now, if I go back and think about the lot case out by the Chelsea Diner there, that was a wetland. I mean, it might not have been mapped so, but it was, you could walk out there and you need to have your boots because you'd sink this far into mushy water. But they were going to put fill in, and so how does, when it says avoid filling, I mean,
You want to be stronger, like filling is prohibited?
well, I
The
don't know,
problem
but
is
I'm
that
just
it can't be
questioning this.
100% prohibited because say you want to put it in that bridge.
If your name is James and you're looking for a bridge, you're exempt. However, all others.
That you will commonly see in Vermont zoning regulations that all filling of wetlands is prohibited, but it's actually not practical because there are instances when
You have to do it.
it has to be done, and you can get a state permit to do it, and you can get an Army Corps of Engineers permit to do
Well,
it.
can we
It's just hard.
say, can we say it's prohibited and then at the end say, unless you have a permit or unless something or other happens? Because I just think regulations that say,
avoid
it would be
filling.
nice if you
Yeah, I
are
agree.
meaningless.
This design guidelines section is
bit-
mushy.
Is a bit. The whole thing is a bit. It'd be
Yes.
really nice if you paid attention, children.
Yeah. And
Before
that's,
snack.
I mean, my rationale behind that is that for the most part, the state regulations are going to rule on this
Yep.
issue. This does give your board some language to work with should something not be adequately covered by the applicable state and federal regulations that are going to come into play with the wetlands.
Well, and once in a blue moon, or once in a while too, there have been moving of wetlands within an area.
Sometimes they do an off-site mitigation type deal can be brokered.
It's customary in other parts of New England to basically say, I really need this wetland, but I'll build another one over there, and then they go, okay. And in Vermont, the Agency of Natural Resources, as far as I can tell, has never said yes. Yeah. So
Except for maybe to V-Trans.
but that's because VTrans doesn't ask. You can get that part. So if you were to ask, the answer is no. If you're VTrans, you just go ahead and do it, and then you go like this, then nothing happens. But so
You don't even ask for forgiveness.
say VTrans.
So in that project, I mean, they were going to be able to fill and to build their store there, the Dollar General people back on the lot farm place. But according to this, they can't?
They were going to place the store up the front outside the area that was impacted by the wetland, and they were going to actually maintain the wetland and back. Is my recollection of that project a
Mostly.
long
There
time
was
ago.
some fill
There was definitely going to be fill, but the part of the parcel that was going to receive the fill was that was not
Bless you.
was not impacted by the wetland. So
No, but anyway. When it rained,
he-
it was all wet.
right. Yeah. The outcome was good in the end, Caroline. It took us a long time, but we got the original
Yeah.
outcome. So
Yeah.
I think the point is there are instances where an applicant maybe want to argue that filling of this portion of the wetland is lesser of an impact than the only other alternative that's available to them. So if you imagine this as a series of development decisions as a series of least impact decisions, you could end up in a situation where actually interfering with a wetland is less damaging than something else. Maybe there's other constraints on the site, like a small
Steep slope.
steep slope or endangered
Wildlife
species.
area.
The presence of an endangered species, like a small colony of plants or something that you don't want to disturb. So then land development professionals are going to sit together and decide, look, all other things being equal, we think it's more important to preserve the colony of rare and endangered plants than to fill this section of a fairly shaky wetland and get you over there. And so it might be too generous in interpretation, and clearly after this week's DOB meeting I shouldn't be feeling this generous at all, but you could read the avoid requirement as the applicant having to show why they don't have a choice. In other words, by evaluating all these competing goals, they're saying, I have hired a biologist and a wetlands professional, and it's our considered opinion that actually filling this wetland is environmentally more sound than the alternatives that are available to us.
I could actually
just
add
change-
review.
yeah.
I could actually add review criteria that
Right.
are not dissimilar to what's, say, above in the riparian
Right.
section, and bring those into there, which is really getting to that point.
Right.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So we can leave this little bit of wiggle room, but
Yeah.
an idea of how to look at them. Okay,
All right, are we on to public outreach?
we are on to public
We
outreach.
made it. Thank
We
you
did
very
it.
much, Brandy. That was great.
So after the last meeting, you sent me out to come up with some way to make public outreach about zoning fun and interesting. And in my two-hour drive home, I pondered this, and I decided that this set of zoning and land use regulations, what it really is a cookbook. And that we,
Because you were hungry, weren't you?
well, we have been talking about how we could have all this fabulous food at these events, so I think maybe I was.
That's a great idea.
So,
Yes,
and
that's great.
and presenting it like that, so that thinking of the idea of what's in here, there are ingredients in here. There's regulations that relate to the form of buildings and the scale of buildings, or uses that are allowed, or type of, parking pieces, landscape. These are all separate ingredients that come together in a project. And then we could talk about the recipes being like the zoning districts, with their pulling from those various ingredients and put together in a way to produce a certain outcome. And we have some pictures that I've started, and we're just going to do more pictures to sort of
This is
say,
great.
this is
Can
what
we
we want to do.
correlate certain foods to certain zoning areas?
Well, you can work on
right?
that.
You can
How
be
about
like,
that?
Yeah, a lot of those
Yes,
really
yes,
mushy
and-
co-op style salads, like the spinach thing, could all be the wetland stuff.
I like steak in the urban center.
Handmade croissants.
Yeah, I want to be in the croissant district. We'll just go to that. So that's my
That'll
sort
be
of
the icing on the cake.
Duh.
my underlying concept for this. So, and in terms of, we brainstormed a whole bunch of ideas at the last meeting, and I've brainstormed some more. There's more here than we can possibly necessarily accomplish, but my thought was to start laying out a calendar and see when we could fit things in, and then once we've sort of figured out where things lie, to do some targeted selection. I'd like to see like a 3-day clump of things over 3 days, and do that a couple of times.
Yeah.
I think that's really effective because it gets people's attention.
Yeah, so the one thing that, so far I've just started to put on to the calendar when various meetings are, but we obviously have the gallery walk and the farmers market are on adjoining days. So that could be like the start of a little clump right there, and that is a possibility. So in terms of the time frame, I think we'd be ready to kick this off sometime in mid-January and go into that maybe second week of February as the time frame for doing this. I was thinking from a display point of view, being able to have some place where we can put up a big zoning map that have places that, it's big, you can walk up to it, you can look at it in detail, people can put notes up, write on it, I don't care, whatever, like that. But we need a space to figure out where we can have that up and available.
I was thinking, I don't know how amenable the strolling of the heifers people is, but that building seems to be open a lot.
On the river garden, yeah.
We thought about that as a potential site. But we think it could be good for gallery walk or something like that if it was available to us. But I think other times, and isn't that where Winter's Farmers Market is held there anyway, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
On Saturdays.
Yeah. And so that would work.
Well, that area on the Saturday, for the gallery, right by the Wyndham Regional Commission, that
Yes, the little
space
lobby
there,
area.
That's nice.
That's good too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a bit out of the way, but I mean, in terms of
People are
attracting
used to
passers
going
by.
to it for gallery walk, though.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and actually,
It could be tied in with
We
that.
could talk to
and-
either
and-
Bob or
and use-
Diane.
And use it as the
yeah, it's all right.
regional commission to kind of sponsor it or
Yep.
something.
Yep.
I'm wondering if on, also too, if we're having trouble finding a space, if it's a one-night thing, sometimes certain landowners who have empty storefronts would open up the storefront for us to use temporarily for an
Yeah,
event
that's a good
and stuff
idea.
like
It is a
that.
good idea.
So you're going to be
About
open
lines,
Brooks House
the
store?
Verde place.
Like the Home Depot, maybe.
They can have relay races, food booths.
Little roller
well,
derby.
I think roller
and
derby-
passing cakes.
Well,
while
I think roller derby there on most Saturdays would be an awesome idea.
Well, where Verde is, I think
Yes, I was just thinking
yeah,
Verde, right?
that still hasn't been filled. It's nice and central, and if it's still not occupied by gallery walk,
Right.
approaching that landlord might be a good space. 'cause
Where was the
it's
other one that? Did,
The Brooks House,
There's
but they're
Bro-
still working on coming.
you're right. There's
How about
Brooks
the
House,
lobby?
and then we also thought of the lobby or the whatever you call it. The
Lobby of the
Atrium.
Brooks House?
the
The
dome,
atrium.
the atrium,
Yeah.
right?
Brooks House.
The atrium of the Brooks House.
That's a nice thing.
That could be
Wonderful.
another way too for them to give back to a community that supported them so much. We did let us in there for a night.
I think the other thing is that we were thinking of is maybe even grabbing a class, seeing if we could grab access to a classroom or something in the college, like CCV or the Tech,
Oh, that's a good idea.
and maybe trying to engage the students there a little more directly as
Oh, that's
kind of
interesting.
new-ish.
Entity.
In-
yeah.
So are we thinking about the 6th and 7th, or the 5th, 6th, and 7th
Of
February?
Yep. And so, do we want to come up with 2 comps? It seems like, I think the other thing that seems to be a big deal is trying to sift through all these options and come up with, because we can't do them all, I don't think.
no.
When is, vacation week,
Oh, right.
Winter
So-
Carnival.
That's-
winter carnival?
Uh,
That's
you know?
the end of February, or is it the end of January?
James looking.
You looking it up now, James?
Yeah,
Oh,
2015.
Yeah. Alright.
So the one thing is that some of these things, once we establish it, could be taken out to a couple. Like, the thing, some sort of display and system for the gallery walk and the farmers market. This could be the same thing, and we could do more than one of the farmers markets. I
Right.
don't know that we necessarily need to do all 4 of them. I put them on the calendar because I was trying to sort out where there was stuff and where it fell. But
it's pretty crowded in there this year at the farmer's market.
Is it?
I was there.
Yeah.
They have more farmers booths, actually. In fact, the whole food section in the back is kind of jammed in.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
If there's
In
space
other
issues.
years, maybe maybe after it might be that some of those farmers booths are only there till the end of the year, and then as January comes, they sort of shift over. I don't know.
Well, if it's too crowded, which I agree, I think it might be, we could use that same space, in the street, in that gallery space, in the Hooker Dunham.
Yeah. Yes.
One thing that I do want to say is that I do hope that we try to hold at least a couple things, especially open, if we have open like group meetings and stuff or neighborhood talks. Downtown, because I feel as a downtown resident where it is not impossible but can sometimes be a pain to walk the 4 streets to where I can have a parking permit and then drive out of town to go to Academy School or the Union High School where a lot of these talks are held, is inconvenient for some of the people who live downtown, especially people who live downtown who don't have transportation, and the meeting is held after the bus system has stopped for the night.
I think that's one of the things that we were talking about at the last meeting, was trying to vary the venues and the times so that we would be dispersing and giving opportunities
Right.
that varied.
And I think in discussions that Sue and I had today in response to this set of suggestions from Brandy, we felt that being able to move around some is useful. And we, don't want to encourage some kind of tribal response like here we are in West Brattleboro and we only really want to talk about those things to do with West Brattleboro, or here we are on Putney Road. We just want to talk about things that are going to influence or affect Putney Road. We want to avoid that sense.
Yeah.
But we also do feel that being able to move around both location and time is going to open us up to encountering more different people. We genuinely could not think of a readily accessible open space in West Brattleboro that would be a good meeting space that's got public access, basically.
Well, it's not West Brattleboro, but the hospital has that nice meeting room.
Well, I thought there's quite a bit that's done at Academy School. I mean,
Yeah.
you have
Yes.
to rent. Don't you have to rent it from
Yes,
the
we
school
do.
district?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Don't get me started on that.
Yes, we do.
All it says on the recreation site is that the winter carnival's during a February vacation. Do you know what that is?
Well, if you go
No.
to the if you go to the supervisory union website, then you get that calendar. I used to have a child that would help me remember these things, but he's
The
beyond it now.
circular thing. It'll tell you that.
Right, and then when you get to that site, they're going to
Vacation is when the winter
say,
carnival
see somebody else's
Is that-
calendar.
See the winter
Is that
carnival
at
website.
this point to spend time on that?
Well, I think
Yes.
Washington's birthday, and that's later in February, so I think we're good
Yeah, this is,
with the
it's not
5th,
till after
6th, and
this.
7th, and
Okay.
you want to pick an earlier date to
Well,
as well?
so then I think that suggests for me,
216 through 220.
Thank you.
oh, so
it's the
that's
next week.
16 through
that's the following
The
week
following week.
then. Yeah. So did we want to try and do something during?
See, I think during
Winter
the winter
carnival?
people are too, especially, well, I don't know, families.
People go away, too.
Families, at least. A lot of people
Yeah,
go
a lot of
away
people go
mid-February.
away.
I know
Yeah.
that I will be in LA in mid-February.
That seems like a reasonable reaction.
Usually by the time February rolls around, I've hit my max with winter.
All right. Right. No, LA seems like a reasonable, solution. So I would argue for trying to do something the week, the middle week of January. So that's the 24th, where there's a farmers market on the 24th. So we could target that we could target that weekend. It doesn't. For me, it doesn't
Friday,
necessarily.
Saturday.
It doesn't have to be, the farmers market per se, but I think that's another time we can do something.
So maybe think about what we can push into maybe like the 22nd through the 24th, and then the 5th through the 7th.
Yeah,
So
Yeah.
the target dates.
yeah, I think so. And does that work for you? So you're thinking that it works better for you because you can deal with things in the block. Are you going to come and camp here? Is that what you
You're coming from somewhere else.
Certainly camp.
Okay. All right. Okay. Sure.
She's going to decant.
I know that I have 1 foot out the door at this point, but I do just want to let you know that on Tuesdays through Saturdays I work 2 to 10 p.m., so that means effectively I'm unavailable for all of those dates.
Tuesdays through Saturdays, you work from when till 10 p.m. at night?
2 p.m. to 10 p.m.
Wow.
I'm a second shift worker.
So Saturday mornings are good.
No.
We can get out. At the end of
Not for a 26-year-old, they're not. No.
Yeah. I was thinking around about 7 a.m. would be awesome
Yeah.
for you.
You know,
David.
if you guys decide to do any Sunday stuff, I would be.
I'm not opposed to Sunday
more
necessarily.
than happy to do
but-
something.
Yeah.
I know Sundays aren't the best, or
those kind of events usually aren't on
Yes.
Sunday.
We should also
for
have a-
instance, on the Monday the 2nd of February.
Yeah, that's a regular planning commission meeting that day anyway. You were
Yeah, we're
on
on
my
for that
calendar.
anyway.
Yeah,
So
Send off, you gotta be there.
I could stay on for that
All right.
meeting on that day.
Okay.
If you'd like, because school for me doesn't technically start until that week.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
So
Oh, I see.
Can I direct people back to the menu of possible ways of doing things a little bit? Is that
yes, I think we
Yeah.
should return to that because we've sort of gotten lost in the
Well,
calendar.
yeah, but just going backwards to that point slowly, I just think that to practice what we're going to present on these two dates, then we should also like film it. Cable access.
yes? I think that
That would kill two birds with one.
I had imagined that what we would do is keep the cable access, do the TV shows as a matter of course.
So when you're talking about cable access here, are you talking about like, for instance,
Going up to the studio.
going up to the studio and doing something not necessarily with a group of people, but something more like informative to be broadcast so
Right.
that people can see it before?
Brandy and Sue.
Discussing the cookbook.
Or we could have one of the
Maybe-
presentations just be filmed.
Bring my copy of the zoning regulations, my
With
copy of the
people
joy of
there.
cooking.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Compare them.
Yeah.
Yes. Here is the spinachy wetland. Here is the.
So
Ice cream steep slope.
Yeah. Really.
Just
Yeah.
let it melt.
Yeah. Just like slide down. Oh, okay. It's gross.
I went
Alright.
to a party for Beak at their anniversary, whatever.
Oh, yeah, they
And
do.
some woman made this cake that was a ski slope with, whipped cream, icing, and little trees. And it was wonderful. Really cool. And delicious.
There you go.
And next
Step up your
career.
game a little bit.
That's what we have to come up with. All right.
Okay.
What do you do with pigs in a blanket? With the land use?
Ugh.
All right. So
Events. Let's
Events.
go back to the potential activities. So, I already discussed the wall.
Hay
mount.
bale's
That
not
would
being
just
used
go
anymore.
up. The photo booth idea. This is something I saw when I was researching what other people were doing to have fun with zoning, and I thought this kind of seemed like a cool idea because this is something you could set up somewhere, and it can almost be self-operating.
Get a photo.
Well, you can actually make a photo booth pretty easy. You just sort of make a background for it and mark where it is you want people to stand, and what your computer. Yeah.
Yep.
People use their phone to
This is,
take a
you gotta
picture.
be a school teacher to understand these kinds of concepts, James.
Yes. So this would be a way where people can sort of write out a comment and take a photo with themselves and their comment. So it's mostly just creates kind
Just
of
like
cool,
Facebook.
yeah, cool visuals that we can circle in at meetings, and a little more fun than just write down a comment and put it in this here box for us.
That would be something I think that if we had a space during Gallery Walk would be a really great one-time event
Yeah.
thing.
Yep.
I think that and the zoning maps on the walls all together.
And then
Great
we
thing.
incorporate it in those comments into the video.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be a really great Gallery Walk
Yeah.
thing.
Okay. So the scheduling of the so the photo booth thing.
They think they could go with the
The
gallery
gallery
walk
walk?
pretty well.
Okay. The other possibility that Sue and I were thinking of was trying to shrink things down and make it as compact as possible so that
like a condensed version, and then if they
Yeah.
want to, they can get.
But also basically mount something, just to have a series of screenshots and have something so that the computer can just run a whole bunch of
Yeah, yeah.
images.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then it only takes one or two people to sit somewhere with a laptop and have a bunch of brochures or something. So I was thinking,
I
depending on
volunteer to sit with a laptop.
oh, okay, good. And so
Like at the co-op.
for instance, at the front of the co-op, right in the lobby area
Yeah,
there,
yeah.
or something like that on a Saturday morning would be quite effective,
Yeah.
as long as we weren't in the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Could even
Just cover up the
I could
places.
find a Monday to do that too.
right.
And I was actually thinking that we could take like a half sheet of paper and turn and set them up a little bit like a recipe card.
Yes.
And have some of the elements of the zoning
Right.
like that, so that we could have those at places that we
Yes,
hand out.
exactly. You could have so you could have the
Have-
label on one side and then
an
flip it and the
image
image
or
on the
something.
other, right?
And yeah,
So,
a little bit of
like
description
ingredient.
of what it is and where you get more information or something like that.
Yeah.
So that
I don't
they're
know if any of this sounds great. I think we're going to win another award.
All right.
okay, yeah. Oh.
Okay, so that's good.
So yeah, so those could be
Yeah.
used in various places, and then I've done walk and talks before, but since we're doing this in mid-January to mid-February,
Yep.
the walk and talk is going to be problematic. I like the walk and talk, but so I was thinking
Virtual walk.
that's why I made it virtual, because it just gets dark too early. I'm not opposed to going out in the cold, but it's really not very productive to go out in the dark and talk about neighborhood issues and zoning.
Yeah, I think, well, when
Can't
when
see
we were
anything.
doing some of it here, we did that, and it was very helpful to be able to see right there what we were talking about. And
Yeah.
I think
we can do something.
I think
excellent.
that's what we were thinking of. That virtual neighborhood tour is this thing that we would just mount on the laptop and just
Yeah,
run, and we could
right.
have different neighborhood tours
Yep.
and just
with a talk going with it,
Yep.
Yep.
explaining the zoning or whatever,
Yep.
different things, different kinds of changes. Yeah. I still think it would be great to, this is not in the category of fun so much, but it could be made into that. Again, what I had suggested last time, the people who were part of the scoping group and the town plan advisory group, all those kinds of people are people who like to have a lot to say about the town.
Right.
And some kind of session where they're invited and maybe we use some of these things, that's rather than just a dry meeting, but that they get to be invited to a one-off.
And that's why I was thinking with 5 here, the group meetings, is to figure out who the already existing
Yes.
groups or entities, or like you're saying, that's a group
Yeah.
of people
Okay.
that could be invited that we should meet with. And these don't necessarily all have to get done in the same 4-week period.
No.
No,
These
they
are
can
something we
happen
could
later.
fit in a little bit longer
Later,
period.
right.
Yeah, I would say that sounds
But
better, do this place fun stuff.
I don't know. I threw out some thoughts there. There may be some other groups that we need to try to fit in and get an invite to go
Some
to
of those
them.
groups are small, so they could just be combined together
Yeah.
if we can agree to a night.
Right.
Yeah.
That's for the Sunday.
Can I ask, what are the steps after these public meetings in terms of like the legal steps to adopt this? Like, does the select board have to
So
vote on?
So these meetings are going to give us feedback to go back and do one more pass-through final stuff. And then when you're happy, you have public hearing process that you have to go through. 2 public hearings because of your population. You have to send it around as well.
Neighboring communities, Wyndham Regional Commission for comment, although not really. I don't think we have to send it to Wyndham Regional
I think you
Commission.
just have to send to your neighboring
communities.
Yeah.
Was Kathy on this board when we sent the select board our subdivision regulations?
No.
No.
How long ago was that?
I joined in July, so
Yeah.
it's probably what, May or something?
Yep.
Is there any
Yeah.
prospect of them taking that up anytime soon?
We should have a conversation, not tonight, but soon, about whether in fact the easier and better way to do it in the end is to actually
Fold it in.
fold subdivision regs into the zoning bylaw and have whether we call it unified land use code.
Okay, sorry.
That's
But yes,
okay.
that is a good topic, but not for tonight.
Yep.
So following
So it's
the-
also a non-answer to your question, but
So following the planning commission's hearing process and having a draft that you're ready to send on, you send it on to the
Right.
select board, they also have hearing, go through the steps, and then they can vote.
We have what they call a 30-day warn period for the public hearings. So effectively what that means is,
It's 15 for the
Is it-
regs.
Like we
it's,
saw it,
it's
like
15 for
For the regs, it's 15.
15. Okay, so it's good.
2 different dates, right?
Right.
For everything.
So allow effectively a month between the first and second. We could squeeze it, but really there's a month probably devoted to those 2 hearings for the planning commission. Then we can send it forward to the select board, and they have a 15-day warn also. So
So 2 or 3 years from now, we'll be done.
But is there, do they have a
Easy and
period of time that
effortless.
they have to act on it?
Actually, there is a period of time in
Yes.
which they have to hold a hearing on it.
But not
They never
act on
have
it.
to act,
That's
but
right.
they have to at least hold a
Hold a
hearing.
hearing.
And then,
yeah. That's within, is it 60 or
Oh, no, it's longer than
it's
that.
120, isn't it?
Yeah, they have a long time to sit around and come up with reasons. for
Right.
not
So
doing
anyway,
it.
I mean, I don't.
Wait.
So if you think about this is like thinking about your kid's school calendar and when are you ever gonna, be able to do anything else. Right now we're in budget season. So for instance, next Monday and Tuesday night are the first 2 budget meetings, narrowly avoiding a budget meeting on Sunday after Thanksgiving. So we're thankful for that. The budget will take most of the select board's attention until
town meeting.
middle of January, the earliest, March, the latest. Then it's preparation for town meeting. Then town meeting happens. There's elections for select board members also, and then it's summertime, and then it's budget season again. So we aim to sandwich ourselves here into the mix. Probably commencing before town meeting, but I think it's realistic to say the adoption.
After town meeting and hopefully after the budget's passed.
Yeah, it would happen after town meeting. So that's in the
Probably
April.
spring.
Yeah, April, May.
Timeframe
Time
has
frame.
been the goal.
Yeah, which is what we've been working on
Yeah.
for some time.
That was part of the proposed
Yep.
calendar anyways.
Yep. And you see from the select board standpoint, there isn't a whole lot of time, to address other things. So,
I mean, really, you want the draft. You want good feelings about it by the time you send it to the select board, because when they're hearing on it, they actually go into effect and they drive your zoning administrator crazy, because it has 2 sets of regulations it has to implement, which is just next to impossible.
right.
So you want to minimize that time period. So
Yeah.
we don't want them to warn a hearing and have that stretched out for a really long time before any decision is made.
Right, because then the zoning administrator is basically working with 2 sets.
And you apprise the board of that so that they
Yeah.
know. to
Yeah, they
not
know.
make-
To not drag their feet.
Hope for the best.
Well, thank you, Brandon.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Okay.
I would
we adjourn?
entertain a moment, yes?
A moment?
Move we adjourn. And thank Randy
All in
and thank
favor?
BCTV, our new person tonight.
Thank you.